She had been stabbed repeatedly, stripped of her clothing, thrown down a rocky slope, and left for dead in the mountains of southern Arizona. For nearly 3 days, she lay unconscious in the cold. When she finally opened her eyes, she was alone, badly wounded, barefoot, nearly naked, and miles from help. This happened in March of 1860 in the Santa Rita Mountains south of Tucson. The woman was only 23 years old. She had been sick for weeks with what people then called fever and ague, likely malaria. Her husband, a lumberman working in the mountains, hoped the cooler air might help her recover. One morning, he left camp for work. Soon after, the dog began barking. Then a young girl staying with them screamed. The woman ran outside and found herself surrounded by Apache warriors. She tried to reach for a pistol, but it was taken from her. She and the girl were forced away from camp and marched into the mountains. According to later accounts, her captors told her that her husband was already dead. He wasn't. He was alive and searching for her, and somehow she seemed to know that someone might come. As she marched farther into the mountains, she tore small pieces from her clothing and dropped them along the trail. She bent branches and disturbed brush, leaving signs behind for anyone trying to follow. But she was already weak from illness. She couldn't keep up. Near the end of the day, her captors decided she was slowing them down. They stripped away much of her clothing, wounded her repeatedly with lances, and threw her down a steep, rocky slope. Then they left, taking the young girl with them. For almost 3 days, the woman did not move. When she finally regained consciousness, she couldn't stand. So she crawled across sharp rock, through brush, back toward the place she hoped she had come from. She ate whatever edible plants she could find and melted snow for water. At night, she scraped at the earth and tried to protect herself from the cold. Her wounds reopened, her strength disappeared, but she still kept moving. At one point, she heard voices, a search party. Her husband was somewhere nearby. She tried to call out, but she was too weak to make herself heard, and the rescuers moved on. She was still alone, so she kept crawling. Eventually, she reached an abandoned camp and found a little flour and coffee left behind. It was barely enough to call a meal, but it was enough to keep her going. Then on March 31st, more than 2 weeks after she had vanished, a group of lumbermen saw a gaunt, injured figure moving toward their camp. At first, they didn't recognize her. Then she spoke and told them her name, Larcena Pennington Page. She had made it back. One later account recorded that one of the first things she asked for was a chew of tobacco. Larcena recovered, but survival was not the end of her story. The following year, her husband, John Page, was killed. Larcena was pregnant at the time and gave birth to their daughter after his death. In the years that followed, more members of their family were killed in the violence that scarred the Arizona territory. She could have left, but she didn't. Larcena remarried, raised a family, became part of civic life in Tucson, and later helped preserve the history of Arizona's early settlers. She lived until 1913, more than 50 years after a lonely canyon in the Santa Rita Mountains was supposed to become her grave. Her story belongs to a brutal and complicated chapter of American history, one that brought terrible loss to Native people and settlers alike. But more than a century and a half later, the part that still stops you is not only that she survived, it's that she stayed. Sometimes the twist of fate isn't the moment you escape death. Sometimes it's the life you choose to build afterward. This has been Twist of Fate Radio. I'm Angela Clark. Until next time, remember, sometimes the smallest choices lead to the biggest consequences. Want to explore more stories like this? Visit twistoffateradio.com. There you can read more details about this story and others like it. Plus, you can submit your own Twist of Fate story to be considered for a future episode. You never know what twist of fate is coming next.